I'm Larry Lindner. I'm the coordinator of Boston's Literary District, and we're the first and so far only official literary district in the United States. Hallie found the seed of her novel's plot in the murder of a gangster at Lana Turner's Beverly Hills home in 1958. The house where it happened was just a few blocks from where she lived. She was 10 years old at the time and had a very visceral reaction going over the murder in pictures and articles that ran in the local newspapers. And that's what she used as the jumping off point for her purely fictional Night, Night, Sleep Tight, but there are elements in it from that story.
I'm Hallie Ephron. I like to say I'm the recovered daughter of screenwriters. And I did grow up in Beverly Hills a really long time ago. In fact, I just went to my 50th high school reunion last weekend, Beverly Hills High School, and my classmates, Richard Dreyfuss.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and Albert Brooks were not there. But I was, so I was holding down the celebrity corner of the Beverly Hills Country Club, which had no golf course or anything or a pool. It was just a building. Anyway, it was a lot of fun and I had a great time. So I'm here to talk about my new book. I thought I would talk just a little bit about growing up in that family. My parents were screenwriters, Henry and Phoebe Ephron. My mother grew up in Brooklyn. They were both my parents, Henry and Phoebe, were the children of Russian immigrants. Their parents did not speak English. So my mother grew up speaking Yiddish. My father grew up basically not talking to his parents because he didn't learn Yiddish. And they were both the bright ones in their families. My mother's brother got sent to Columbia. Of course, you know, the boy would in the family. She got sent to Hunter, which was free then, completely free, hard to believe. And she majored in English. She graduated the first in her class. She got a job on Broadway working for a famous Broadway producer who's Gilbert Miller. The name came to me. And so she was kind of a big deal. In her 20s, very glamorous, very beautiful, tall, statuesque, kind of like she looked like Katharine Hepburn and she cracked jokes like Dorothy Parker. So that was my mother. My dad, in the meanwhile, was the son of a guy who owned a rug store up on Fordham Road. A very Jewish thing to do. And my dad would work in the store, and he was the one in his family who got sent to Cornell, where he got thrown out in his senior year for stealing books. And instead of becoming an economics professor, which is what he wanted to do, he found himself living in Hell's Kitchen in a rented room and trying to make his way into Broadway as a stage manager. And at night, he wrote plays that he couldn't get anyone to produce. So when he met my mother, he came to a party at her house and he introduced himself and she said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a playwright." He had chutzpah, as we say. And so he promptly proposed to her, he said, fell in love instantly, and she asked if she could read one of his plays. Flash forward a year, they got married, they had a baby, and what happened in those days, if you had a child, was you lost your job if you were a woman. So she ended up walking a baby carriage up and down Riverside Park instead of going to Broadway to work. It must have been horrible for her. She was so not a mothering mother. She was, you know, all about cigarettes and scotch and smart talk and not having a baby. So it was the Depression. They had to move in with her parents on 116th Street, shared an apartment, and it must have been a very difficult time. And my father was smart. He said, "Don't go back to work," he said, "write a play with me." And they did. They wrote a play called Three's a Family, which was about a couple in the Depression who have a baby. They move in with their parents. It's a nightmare. And it ran for more than 1,000 performances on Broadway. His first play that he ever sold. And then Hollywood beckoned and said, "Come to Hollywood." So I wasn't born yet, but my sister Nora was born, my sister Delia was born. They're both very well published writers. They went to Hollywood by train, of course. In those days, you didn't fly. It was the what was the name of the train? The I'm not bringing up the proper noun, but anyway. And a few years later, I was born, and my parents lived where a lot of Hollywood writers lived. If you've been in Beverly Hills, have any of you been in Beverly Hills? Oh, good. So you know that it's kind of at the lower border is Pico, then Olympic, then Wilshire, then Santa Monica, then Sunset, then way up is Mulholland Drive. Okay. So if you are a four-star person with, you know, like Frank Sinatra, Fred Astaire, you would live above Sunset. South of Mulholland, because over the top of Mulholland, you're in the valley, which is God's country, and nobody wants to live there or wanted to. But my parents lived kind of in what was called the Flats, which was between Sunset and Wilshire, Sunset and Santa Monica, actually. And so their neighbors weren't Frank Sinatra. Our neighbors were people like Carl Reiner was one of our neighbors. At the time, he was a television writer. We had a neighbor who was a television actor. We had another one who was in the soaps. So it was a jeweler, a dentist, a doctor. It wasn't the primo part of Beverly Hills, but that's where we lived. And I grew up insisting I was not a writer. My sisters were writers. They all came out of the chute writing. Nora, most famously, with her novel Hanging Up, and then wrote movies. You've got Mail, When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, fabulous, fabulous movies. And my sister Delia came out. She wrote How to Eat Like a Child, which was a New York Times #1 bestseller. She wrote Hanging Up, which was turned into a movie. My sister Amy wrote Cup of Tea. So I don't think it's surprising that I said I didn't want to be a writer, because, I mean, you know, I always thought, well, people will compare me, and I did not want to do that. I had to get a certain amount of maturity, of age, under my belt in order to feel comfortable saying, I'm going to try writing. And if you want to compare them to me, well, that's your business, you know. And the truth is, though, I did pick crime fiction, because it's what none of them write. When I first started writing, what I did was I wrote memoir, which is what a lot of new writers write. You know, we write about ourselves, we write about growing up. I wrote about growing up in Beverly Hills. I wrote a memoir that started growing up in Beverly Hills. It was all about shoes, and it went downhill from there. It was good in the sentences and in the paragraphs, but the story really circled the drain. I didn't know anything about plot or arc or stakes or how you really make a novel-length work. So I abandoned it, but I didn't throw it away. Don't ever throw anything away. And I went on and eventually wrote a series of mysteries with a friend, co-author, and then I wrote my own standalones. And then when it came to writing this new book, I knew I wanted to go back to Beverly Hills. For the first time, I was going to write about what was it like growing up there in the 60s, what's it like coming back in the 80s. And I went back and I pulled out all those old files with all the old writing that really smelled awful. And you know what? They weren't as bad as I thought they were. And not only that, at this point I knew what they needed. They needed a murder. And since I now know how to write murders, I went and I thought about it, and I said, well, what murder could I put in a book about growing up in Beverly Hills in the 60s and the 80s? And the answer was very clear to me. It's the murder that captured my imagination when I was 10. It was the murder of Lana Turner had a gangster boyfriend. He was a henchman of Mickey Cohen, and her daughter, Cheryl Crane, who was 14 at the time, supposedly while they were arguing, the pair were arguing, she came into the room and stabbed him to death. She confessed. She went to juvenile hall, basically. She was found guilty of justifiable homicide. She wasn't brought to trial before a jury. She had what was called a coroner's jury. And I remember that so well. My parents bought the morning paper, the LA Times, and the evening paper, the Herald, and I would read the stories about the murder. I would look at the pictures of Cheryl Crane. They put her in a white coat with a babushka, or a scarf, and sunglasses as they took her to the, you remember it too.
I was fascinated by
Yes. And you know, it was in papers all across the country. I go to Ohio and people remember this murder. It was also one of the first trials that was ever televised. In 1958. They actually televised it, and it was amazing. So I used to, the part of the reason that I became so fascinated with it, it wasn't just that Cheryl Crane was 14, but we lived on the 700 block of Linden Drive, and they lived at the top of the 700 block of Bedford, which was 2 streets over. So you went to the top of the block and over 2. And I would ride my bike over to that house and stare at the upstairs window and think, what if I'd been in the house that night? What if Cheryl Crane was my best friend? And that's really the splinter of what started, that's the murder in Night Night Sleep Tight. Now, I didn't want to write Lana Turner's story. I didn't want to be sued. Cheryl Crane's still alive. And I'm also not interested in who really killed Johnny Stompanato. Now, there's a whole raft of literature about did she kill him or didn't she, or did Lana Turner kill him, or I don't care. What was interesting to me about it was a 14-year-old girl in the center of this kind of horrific publicity. And what would it be like for her after? I mean, even today, if Cheryl Crane goes to a cocktail party, she introduces herself to people in the room, and they look at her and their pupils dilate and they think, we know what you did. I know who you are. She can never outrun it. It's like Michael Jackson's kids, or Natalie Wood's children, or Jane Mansfield's kids, where everyone think poor Jane Mansfield was decapitated in that car accident. She wasn't. That was misreported in the first news story and has just taken on a life of its own. And so there you go, having to live with that kind of shadow. So I wanted to write about that. I created a cast. One of the things I like to do when I'm writing is I create a cast for my book using actors. So when I imagine them, when I'm writing them, I'm writing these actors doing these things. So it helps me get away from Lana Turner, because I decided my main character, the Lana Turner character, whom I named Eleanor Nickel, would be played by Joan Collins, as she was in Dynasty, you know, that Joan Collins, you know, who was not Lana Turner at all. I decided that the daughter who kills Johnny Stompanato would be played by Anne Margaret, as she was in Bye Bye Birdie. Remember, she was so delicious and sexy and innocent in a weird way. And I also based that character on a friend of mine who I grew up with, who was very voluptuous in elementary school, which is a tough thing to be. I thought of Johnny Stompanato as Ricardo Montalban. Did you know he played Khan in the original Star Trek television series? Back in the 60s, I guess it was. So I had a picture of him, I had Anne Margaret, I had Joan Collins up on my computer. And then I needed the character of myself, my fictional self in that. So I decided it would be Deborah Winger, as she was in terms of endearment. 2 reasons. One, because she looks like a real person. You know, there's not many actresses who actually look like genuine people. And she looks a little bit like me, because she looks, you know, she's got a nose and dark features. I could relate to her. And then I thought, well, I have to have a father, because the book opens with the father, who's based on my dad, dying. And the dad in the book was my dad, a more generous version of my dad, I might say. And Alan Alda, a young Alan Alda, is who I think of as playing that. And Who else is there? So those are the characters, and so I mixed my own cast with this celebrity cast with this story, and I came up with Night Night Sleep Tight. And I'm going to read just a little bit of it for you, so you can see how it opens. It opens with a kind of scary scene. Arthur Unger slides open the glass door and steps out onto his flagstone patio. He's had a few drinks, but he doesn't feel them. It's late at night, and though the sky is clear and there is no moon, there are no stars either. There never are. Between ambient light and air pollution, he'd have to drive to Mount Baldy to see Orion's belt. The sky is, he gazes up at it, opaque, inky, like warm tar. His wife would have nailed it. She was great at narrative description and dialogue, and of course, she could type. He was the plotmeister. Arthur takes a final drag on his cigarette, the tip glowing in the dark, and stubs it out in one of the dirt-filled terracotta planters in which Gloria once cultivated gladiolas. Or was it gardenias? Something with a G. He picks up one of 3 cut glass tumblers sitting on the table on the patio, left over from last night's unpleasantness. Why does he have to rehash what was agreed to and settled on years ago? He did what he promised. He did what he promised. Debt paid in full should be stamped across his forehead, and he has the paperwork to prove it. He raises the glass in a toast to the end of old debts and life without gardenias. He knocks back lukewarm Scotch-flavored ice melt, then reaches into the house and flips a light switch. The water in the pool, it's just 25 meters long, not the size to which he feels entitled, not what he expected to have earned by this point in his life, glows radiant turquoise against a row of coral tiles above the waterline. Arthur imagines his yard is a movie set. A camera dolly backs up in front of him as he strides across the lawn in terry cloth slippers, an open Hawaiian shirt, and bathing trunks. A pair of amber-tinted swim goggles hangs loose around his neck. He reaches to unlatch the gate in the utilitarian chain-link fence surrounding the pool, but it's already open. He once had to scoop a neighbor's chihuahua from that pool, and he has no desire to fish another dead animal from the water. He slips through the gate, latches it behind him, tosses a towel over the chaise longue made of aluminum tubing and white metal strapping, takes off his shirt, and drapes it there too. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. No, I can't. Sorry. The pool has been skimmed at least. That's supposed to be his son's job, but Henry rarely notices that it needs skimming, rarely notices much at all. Henry seemed stunned when Arthur told him the house has to go on the market, though this would be patently obvious to anyone living there and even minimally aware of anyone's needs but his own. Time to grow up, baby boy. That's a line from a musical comedy Arthur and his wife wrote, Show Off. It was supposed to star Judy Holliday and Dean Martin, but she dropped out to have throat surgery. And then, of course, there was the breast cancer. Tragic for her. Tragic for audiences to lose such a brilliant comedic talent. Arthur should have been big, could have been big, would have kicked his and Gloria's career back into high gear. Plus, he'd have scored producing credits and points on the back end. Even with the studio's creative bookkeeping, eventually, it might have earned him a decent-sized pool, and enough in the bank that he could have offered to help his kids out when they needed it. But he's not out of the game yet. His book could catapult him back on the A-list. It's the quintessential Horatio Alger story. He'll write the screenplay, direct the film version, cast a great actor in the lead, someone capable of nuance, subtlety, a little comedic flair. Arthur runs his fingers back and forth through his hair, still dark and curly, about the only good thing that both he and Henry inherited from Arthur's father. Then he stretches his arm wide, fingers splayed, inhales deeply, coughs. He tries to imagine his girls, ingenues as they were once called, perched around the edge of the pool. He sees the camera panning from one to the next, sliding appreciatively across cleavage and shapely leg, then over to him as he smiles benevolently back. Give a little, get a little. That's always been his motto. Only lately he's been getting just that, a little, and sometimes not even that. He adjusts his swim goggles over his eyes, His girls, if they were still there, would be a golden blur now. The camera dolly would have faded into murky darkness. He imagines him tracking him as he steps slowly, deliberately to the end of the pool. The wall of the garage, lit by a wavery glow, makes an eerie backdrop as his shadow creeps up it. In a film, it would feel like foreshadowing. Very dramatic. Perhaps a bit melodramatic. At least that's what Gloria would have said, and she had been right. Arthur faces the pool, centers himself. 3 long strides and he feels the concrete apron around the pool under his bare foot. A leap and he's airborne, outstretched and arcing in a racing dive. He lands more heavily than he'd like, and the water is a lot colder than he expects, but the initial shock quickly recedes. He swims, stroke after stroke after stroke, a turn of his head to take a breath. He reaches the far end, barely pausing before pushing off and surging in the opposite direction. Back and forth, he's nearing the zone, the place where his mind lets go and muscle memory takes over. He starts to review his work in progress, the way he used to work through a movie script, running the maze of major and intermediate plot points, unpacking emotions, goals, and obstacles that drive him, probing at knots and dead ends until he's worked them through. But what rises to the surface, like the taste of a bad oyster, is last week's phone call and tonight's meeting. Arthur feels his shoulders tensing up, his breathing beginning to labor. If he wanted to be dictated to, told what he could and couldn't write, he'd be working on a screenplay. He tries to let go, to push away unfinished business as he pushes off from the end of the pool. As he strokes, he tells himself, there's always tomorrow. A wrong answer buzzer goes off in his head. As Gloria often chides him, focus on the now. In this moment, as he swims in a steady rhythm, he is the star of his own movie. His life story brought to the silver screen, the backyard, the set. A director hidden in darkness behind the camera has long ago called quiet, roll camera, action, fade in. All attention is focused on Arthur as he turns again at the far end of the pool. A beat. He plunges back in the opposite direction, stroking powerfully toward the spotlight where who? Billy Wilder and Elizabeth Taylor, he decides, are waiting for him to surface and accept a golden statuette with his name engraved on the base. Recognition of his lifetime achievement, something even his kids can feel proud of. Ready for his close-up, Arthur reaches the opposite end of the pool, raises his head, and hangs there for what he thinks will be just a moment, basking in the illusion that he's the star of his own show, realizing too late that the spotlight he sees through the goggles, a yellow, water-streaked glow, is real and getting bigger, until it's bright and blinding and right in his face. He blinks and looks away, and in that split second the light goes out, and we hear the sound that Arthur can't, the thud of heavy metal connecting with Arthur's head. His prefrontal cortex, to be precise, the part of his brain responsible for a lifetime's worth of lousy decisions and selfish moves. It's a wrap. So I like to think my father would have liked that opening, even though that is definitely him. Though I don't think he ever swam a lap because he was a Brooklyn boy and never really learned to ride a bike or drive a car very well and swam like a beached whale. So has the book been optioned? No. I wish. You know, I have talked to film people about it, and I think they say there would be interested in it if it really was the Lana Turner story. If I had written a book and I had kept the characters true to who they are, to their inspiration. But that's not the book I wanted to write. And I wouldn't write a book just to get a film deal. One of my books was made into a movie. I wrote a book called Never Tell a Lie. That was my first standalone after I wrote a series. And after I wrote a series with my co-author, I was sure I would never come up with an idea for a book. Because in the series, we wrote about a forensic neuropsychologist, which is what my writing partner was. So they were all his stories. Did you know those books? No. So I took this like 2-year hiatus where I was sure I wasn't going to come up with an idea, and then I went to a yard sale. I love yard sales. My husband is a yard sale maniac, and this one was around the corner from our house, and it was being run by in a house that I knew. Our daughter used to play there. There were new owners. They'd been taking out walls. I was dying to know what was going on in that house. So I'm chatting up the woman, you know, and finally I asked so many questions, she said, "Do you want to go inside and look around?" And I said, "I'd love to." So I go inside, the house is empty, and there's something very creepy about being in someone else's empty house. Like you're sure someone's going to leap out of the closet at you or something. So I was on the second floor, and finally the mystery writer in me kicked in, and I thought, what if a woman goes to a yard sale, somehow she talks her way into the house, she goes inside, and she never comes out. So the protagonist in my book is the woman who has the yard sale, who has this woman that she knows from high school come back. They're both 9 months pregnant. The woman chats her up, makes her very uncomfortable. Then her husband takes the woman inside to give her a little tour of the house, and that's the last anyone sees of her. So, and they're both 9 months pregnant. So that was a fun book to write. Partly because I had no idea what happened to her. No idea what happened to her. No idea at all. Yeah, when I got to the end, I figured it out. But that was partly fun. But the other thing, and this is something I learned about writing suspense novels, for me anyway, is even though they are fun, my books are page turners. You know, their scenes are short. I like to hook you at the end of a scene and grab you with the next. I don't want, they're perfect airplane books, you know. I want it to be an easy read that doesn't feel like you have to labor to get the words read. However, they're about something. And Never Tell a Lie is really about having my first child and being isolated because you've been in the working world and now you're in your neighborhood where you don't know anyone, and the vulnerability that you feel when you do have this baby that you care more about than life itself. And so I wanted to write about that. Just as in Night Night Sleep Tight, I'm really writing about the toxic effects of celebrity, the underbelly of what can happen when things don't go well. So that's a long answer to that question. She asked me about the pearls I'm wearing and the pearls on the cover of the book. Well, what do you think? First of all, I got the cover design of the book before the book was in galleys. What happens when you write a book is you write a lot of versions, you have to send it back and forth to your editor, and then you make a lot of changes, and then they do galleys, which are paperback versions of the book that go to the reviewers and bookstores. Well, this was before the galleys came out, so I still had time to make changes in the book. I saw the cover, pearls. There were no pearls in the book. So I still had time. So when you read the book, when you get to the pearls, that's like the last thing I wrote in the book. I just stuck them in there. Yeah, I had to have them in there, and they belonged. There was a lovely place for them. And I got them, if I may say, on Etsy. There's a woman on Etsy. She's the pearl. What does she call herself? White Pearl Gem. And she has a source in China that she buys cultured pearls from directly. She buys them by the yard, and then she hand knots them. So you can tell her exactly what, she does a lot of bridal groups. You know, like if you were a bride and you wanted to get something for all your bridesmaids that was the same, you can order them. So I told her exactly how long I wanted it. She sent me samples. It was great. Not going to put that on there. So I felt like I got a great bargain, and she was a lovely, lovely person. And I put her on our blog. I blog on I blog on Jungle Red with Julia Spencer Fleming, Hank Phillippe Ryan, Lucy Burdett, me, Reese Bowen, Deborah Crombie, and Susan Elia McNeil, who are all terrific writers, Jungle Red writers. And so I invited her to blog. And I hope she got some business out of it because she was so lovely, and I just think they're beautiful. So thank you for asking. Thank you. She found out about me because she read my writing book, which is called Writing and Selling Your Mystery Novel, which is a terrific beginning book for really laying out the process in an understandable way. But then she asked about my process. Sort of getting to where I am is really what you're saying. How did you finally get a book published? Does that summarize? Yeah. I was very unsure of myself as a writer, so as I said, I wrote that memoir. I abandoned it in the middle. I wrote a bunch of essays. My first published works were essays. I took classes at the Cambridge Adult Ed Center here in Cambridge with Mopsy Strange Kennedy, who's a wonderful teacher, on essay writing. I thought, essays, oh, that's easy. Right, they're short. You don't have to do any research. All you have to do is have opinions. I have opinions. And then, of course, I discovered it's a gruelingly difficult and very demanding structure, essays. But I did. I sold one of the first ones I wrote to National Public Radio, actually, WBUR. Bought it. I got to go on WBUR and read it, which was the best part. And I felt like I was on my way. I wasn't. I had like 4 years of rejection after that. But I will tell you, I was so lucky because that first time out, I got like somebody stamped my forehead and said, she's okay, and gave me a check, $50. But somehow being paid and having a real, it just fueled me for years of rejection after that. And I wish every aspiring author has the good luck that I have to sell something early on. So after that, I wrote 2 novels that are in the drawer. They just didn't go anywhere. And then I started working with my writing partner. It took us 2 years to write the first, what were called the Peter Zach novels, and to get them good enough to where we felt we could shop them. I did this traditional sending it to agents. In those days, you didn't email agents. So I wrote a cover letter, and I went to the copy center and I made 25 copies of my cover letter and the opening chapter. And I queried agents that I picked because I knew that they represented authors that wrote books like mine. I had gone to Barnes & Noble and opened the books and see who they acknowledged. Then I'd gone to the Writer's Digest book and found their agents, how to contact them. I wrote a cover letter that says, and my sister Nora has read this book and loved it, which was a lie. But I got, of the 25 queries that I sent, and I don't recommend anybody do 25 queries, 23 wanted to see the manuscript. So this is before email. Now I'm at Kinko's making 3 copies of a 300-page manuscript. It was good training for being a writer because right away I was deeply in the red. And so of those, only one wanted to represent the book. I got a lot of really great feedback, which I revised. And I got a wonderful agent who then, within a year, after more revisions and more rejection, sold it to St. Martin's for a 2-book contract. And then they wanted 3 more books after that, and then we were tired of writing together. So those books used to take me a year to write because I knew the characters, and a traditional mystery has a kind of structure to it. You know, something bad happens in the first quarter and then you figure out what it is by the end. And you have a character who's the sleuth. So when I started to write standalones, they don't have that structure. They're different. They're just stories. They're the stories I want to tell. Those are the kinds of stories that come to me now. These days it takes at least 2 years for me to write a book. I don't outline. I can't outline. I mean, I can outline. If I do outline, I'm immediately off the outline. The only reason I outline is to give me the courage to write. And sometimes that works. And then immediately I have to revise the outline and go somewhere else. So they say writers are divided into the plotters and the pantsers, the people who fly by the seat of their pants. And I used to be a plotter with the series mysteries we plotted. But now I'm completely a pantser. I've just finished 58 pages of a book. I have no idea where it's going. I mean, I kind of do, but really not. So that's the short answer. He's asking me about my writing collaborator. Do we still get along? Do we still speak? And has he gone on to write anything else? Yes, we're still friends. I think we broke up just in time. It's a lot of work and we weren't making a lot of money. And I was doing all of the publicity, and the great thing is I learned I could write with him. They're his stories, more or less. About 2/3 of each book is his story. But he was afraid I was going to make him write, and I was afraid he was going to want to write. And he didn't. So I did all the writing. We did all the plotting together. There are plenty of collaborations that are like that. No, he hasn't gone on to write another book because he doesn't know how to write. Okay, but he has worked with other people because he has this amazingly interesting life. You know, he runs a unit at Harvard's McLean Hospital. He evaluates people accused of murder and on trial for all kinds of things. So he's got characters, he's got stories, he's got experiences, and you know, a life is a wonderful thing for a writer, as opposed to just sitting in your room and writing. So, how did we find each other? I've known him since 1970. My husband was a graduate student in physics at City University, and Don was a freshman in a class that he taught. And we've just kept in touch because he's that kind of guy. He figures out how to keep in touch with people. I'm so happy that you came. Thank you very much.
And after a hard day on the job, in the heat, the dust and the noise, learning the ropes on icy staging, in the wind, with the snow-covered ground so far below, my fingers remember it all.